He held a gun to my wife, right on the porch, in broad daylight, in front of the neighbors. No interrogation, no justifiable reason, just because my wife refused to tear down the fence that he considered offensive. A self-proclaimed head of the neighborhood security, wearing a uniform bought online, swaggering as if the law was in his pocket. I thought only movies had scenes of false power, until I saw my wife's hands tied behind her back. But in that moment he pushed the wrong person to the limit, and once the silence is torn, the false power holder will pay the real price. 2 years ago, my wife and I moved to Oakwood Heights, in hopes of a quieter life after years of stressful work. Sarah, 37, told her neighbors she was a fitness consultant at a nearby military facility. I was Mike Thompson, 42, a civil engineer with 18 years of experience designing and building things. Life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm, until we ran into Derek Morrison. At 38, Derek was both the local police officer and the homeowner association's self-proclaimed neighborhood safety president. He acted as the guardian of Oakwood Heights. For the first few months after we moved in, Derek Morrison was actually a decent neighbor. He helped me fix a broken water pipe during our second week, and Sarah often received compliments from him about her landscaping skills. Derek even invited us to weekend barbecues, and proudly introduced us to other residents as the model couple of the neighborhood. He seemed genuinely friendly, always ready with a wave and a smile when we crossed paths during our evening walks. His police cruiser parked in the driveway gave the whole street a sense of security, and neighbors often mentioned how lucky we were to have real law enforcement living right here among us. Everything changed when we decided to replace our old wooden fence with a 6-foot wrought iron barrier. We had gone through all the proper channels, city permits, property surveys, neighbor notifications, the whole 9 yards. Our lot lines were clearly marked, and according to city ordinance, we were well within our rights to install a fence up to 8 feet tall. But Derek's attitude shifted overnight. The friendly waves stopped, and I noticed him standing in his front yard, arms crossed, watching our contractors work with obvious disapproval. His wife Linda started avoiding eye contact when she walked their dog past our house, hurrying along like she was afraid to be seen talking to us. "Mike, would you consider lowering that fence to 4 feet? Derek appeared at our front door one evening, still wearing his uniform polo but with a tone that had lost its neighborly warmth. "It is blocking my view of the street from my kitchen window." I explained that we needed the privacy, especially since Sarah often worked from home and handled sensitive client calls. "I understand that," Derek replied, his smile becoming more forced, "but as a representative of the homeowner association, I think we should prioritize community harmony over individual preferences." That was the first time Derek had ever mentioned having any official role in the neighborhood association. Before that day, he had never claimed to have authority over anything except maybe organizing the annual block party. A week later, I found an official-looking letter in our mailbox, complete with a law firm's letterhead and threatening legal language. The document demanded we adjust the fence height to comply with neighborhood aesthetic standards within 30 days, or face fines of $500 per day. The letterhead looked professional, with embossed seals and heavy paper stock that seemed legitimate. Sarah was in the backyard doing her evening workout routine, an intense series of exercises that I had never seen at any regular gym. When I showed her the letter, she was wearing her usual black athletic gear, and I noticed for the first time that there was a small pin on her collar that looked military, though I could not make out the details. "They cannot do this," Sarah said, barely breathing hard despite having just finished what looked like Special Forces training. "We have all the proper permits." Her voice carried a certainty that surprised me, like she knew exactly what legal grounds we stood on. When I called the law firm listed on the letterhead, the receptionist told me they had never heard of our case and definitely had not sent any letters to our address. Someone had forged legal documents, a federal crime. The receptionist seemed genuinely confused and concerned when I described the letter, asking me to email her a copy for their records. That night, Sarah was unusually quiet during dinner, frequently checking her phone and stepping outside to take calls that she described as work emergencies. I asked if everything was okay, and she just said that her job had become more complicated lately but could not discuss the details. There was something in her voice, a tension I had never heard before. Derek began spreading rumors throughout the neighborhood that we were uncooperative and challenging community values. Neighbors who used to chat with us at the mailbox suddenly avoided eye contact. Mrs. Patterson from across the street, who used to bring us homemade cookies, started walking her dog on the opposite side of the road. Anonymous notes appeared under our windshield wipers, politely suggesting we work with the community for everyone's benefit. One particularly nasty message accused us of being outsiders who do not understand how good neighborhoods operate. The handwriting was different on each note, suggesting Derek had recruited multiple people to his cause. Sarah started spending more time in our backyard, often on phone calls that involved a lot of technical jargon I did not understand. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of her through the window, and she would be standing in perfect military posture, speaking with an authority that seemed completely different from the woman I thought I knew. I began noticing things about Sarah that I had somehow missed before, the way she automatically scanned every room when we entered a restaurant, how she always positioned herself where she could see all the exits, the precise economical movements that seemed too controlled for someone who was just into fitness. The situation exploded during Derek's emergency homeowner association meeting, held right in front of our house on a Saturday afternoon. Nearly 20 neighbors gathered while Derek stood on our sidewalk with a newly made sign reading Neighborhood Security Chairman, and began what felt like a public trial. As you can see, the Thompson family has refused to comply with community standards, Derek announced, pointing directly at our fence. This is not just about aesthetics, it is about security. A fence that high could hide suspicious activities from street view. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sarah watched from our living room window, and I noticed she was systematically noting the position of every person in the crowd, like she was conducting some kind of tactical assessment. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, nothing like the casual fitness enthusiast I thought she was. During his speech, Derek dropped a bombshell that left me stunned. I have conducted a background investigation on our new neighbors, he declared, with the confidence of someone who believed he had every right to invade our privacy. Sarah Thompson works at a classified military facility, and her exact job description is marked as confidential. The crowd murmured nervously, and I saw several neighbors taking steps backward. Derek continued, "For all we know, we could be living next to people who pose a threat to national security." His words were calculated to instill fear, and I could see it working on the faces around me. That is when I realized Derek had crossed a line that would change everything between us forever. This was not about offense anymore, this was about power, control, and something much darker than neighborhood politics. The final confrontation came exactly 1 week later, when Derek arrived at our front door with 2 other men wearing police uniforms. Derek announced they had received anonymous reports about suspicious late-night activities and possible weapon storage on our property. The other officers looked uncomfortable, like they were not entirely sure why they were there. "I am sorry, mate, but I have to follow protocol," Derek said with fake sympathy, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Your wife needs to cooperate with the security inspection." There was something in his eyes, a gleam of satisfaction that told me this was personal. Sarah stepped outside wearing her black athletic uniform, and for the first time I got a clear look at the small insignia on her collar, a golden trident that seemed familiar but that I could not quite place. "I am happy to cooperate," Sarah said with a calm that seemed almost unnatural, "but first I would like to see your search warrant and verification of the legal basis for this inspection." Derek's confidence faltered slightly. "We do not need complicated paperwork for a simple neighborhood security check," he replied, his voice losing some of its usual authority. "I am a police officer, and I have the right to investigate potential threats." Sarah's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, straighter, more alert, like a soldier snapping to attention. "Officer Morrison," she said, emphasizing his supposed title, "every law enforcement action requires proper documentation. I am sure you understand the importance of following legal procedures." Derek's face reddened, and his hand moved closer to his weapon. "Do not lecture me about police procedure, lady. I have been keeping this neighborhood safe long before you moved here." His mask was slipping, revealing something ugly underneath. That is when I realized that Derek Morrison had made the biggest mistake of his life, because the look in Sarah's eyes was not fear or submission. It was the cold, calculating gaze of someone who had been trained to handle far more dangerous situations than a neighborhood bully with a badge. That evening, Sarah sat me down on our living room couch and removed her jacket, revealing her full uniform with that distinctive golden trident clearly visible. "Mike, there is something I need to tell you about my real job," she began, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity one had never seen before. "I am not just a fitness consultant. I am Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Thompson, and I train Navy SEALs at the Naval Special Warfare Center." The words hit me like a physical blow, reshaping everything I thought I knew about the woman I had married. 18 years in the military, 12 of those working with special operations units. I was assigned here to develop new training protocols for SEAL candidates at the Coronado base down south. The work is classified, which is why I could not tell you the details. Her voice carried the weight of years of keeping secrets. Sarah explained that Derek's investigation into our background had triggered red flags in the military intelligence community. He does not have clearance to access military personnel records, but somehow he knew I worked at a classified facility. That means either he has connections inside the system, or he is not what he appears to be. Using skills she had learned in intelligence gathering, Sarah began conducting her own investigation into Derek Morrison. She pulled up databases I did not know existed, made phone calls to contacts whose names were never mentioned, and analyzed Derek's behavior patterns with scientific precision. What she discovered was shocking. Derek Morrison was not listed in the official directory of the San Diego County Police Department. His badge, which looked authentic to civilian eyes, was actually a high-quality replica ordered from an online costume company. The neighborhood security chairman position he claimed to hold did not exist in any official homeowner association documentation. The Real Homeowner Association board had not met in over 2 years. Sarah reported, showing me documents she had obtained from the county clerk's office. Derek has been operating completely outside any legitimate authority. The implications were staggering. Everything Derek had done was essentially criminal impersonation. Within 48 hours, Sarah had uncovered Derek's real identity and criminal history. Derek Morrison was actually Derek Mitchell, a former private security guard who had been fired from 3 different companies for abuse of authority and creating false incident reports. He had moved from Arizona to California after being sued by 2 families for harassment and intimidation. He is a wannabe cop who has been impersonating law enforcement officers, Sarah reported with military precision, and that is a serious federal crime. The pattern was clear. Derek had been running this same scam in multiple locations, but when Sarah prepared to file a complaint with the real police, Derek somehow learned about our investigation before we could act on it. I realized we had a leak but could not imagine who it could be. Derek appeared at our door the next morning with 3 actual police officers, claiming we had been creating false evidence and attempting to defame a law enforcement official. "I am sorry, Sarah, but I have reported this to my supervisors," Derek said with a triumphant smile. Accusing a police officer of misconduct is a serious matter, and any evidence you have gathered is suspect. He was playing his role perfectly, looking like the reasonable authority figure dealing with difficult residents. The real officer seemed to believe him, at least initially. That is when Linda Peterson, Derek's wife, knocked on our door later that evening, wearing a worried expression and wringing her hands nervously. "I cannot stay quiet anymore," Linda whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might be watching. "Derek is not really a police officer. We moved here after he was fired from a security company in Phoenix for pretending to be a cop." Linda revealed that Derek had purchased fake badges and uniforms online and had been terrorizing neighbors in multiple communities using the same pattern. He has a problem with power and control. He becomes obsessed with dominating whatever neighborhood we move to. Linda seemed genuinely remorseful and offered to provide documentation of Derek's real employment history and the receipts for his fake police equipment. She appeared to be taking a huge risk by coming forward, but a week later I discovered Linda talking on her phone in her backyard where she thought no one could hear her. "They bought the whole story," Linda was saying. "Sarah even shared their plan to gather evidence this weekend." "Derek, you were right. Playing the victim wife worked perfectly. I realized we had been set up. Derek had orchestrated his wife's confession to learn our strategy and stay one step ahead of us. Linda was just as involved in the deception as her husband, maybe even more so, because she was the better actor. "We need to change tactics completely," Sarah told me after I reported Linda's betrayal. "I am going to use capabilities that Derek does not know I have." There was something in her voice, a shift from defensive to offensive, that sent chills down my spine. Sarah contacted Captain James Rodriguez, her former teammate from Naval Special Warfare Command who now worked with the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force. "Sarah, you are dealing with a dangerous individual," Rodriguez confirmed during a secure phone call. "Derek Mitchell has 4 prior arrests for impersonating police officers and threatening civilians. He moves from state to state, repeating the same pattern of intimidation and fraud." Rodriguez agreed to provide covert assistance, treating this as a potential national security matter. With Rodriguez's help, Sarah installed professional-grade surveillance equipment around our property and began documenting Derek's activities with military precision. The equipment was invisible to civilian eyes, but captured everything: conversations, meetings, phone calls made outdoors. The breakthrough came when they recorded a phone conversation between Derek and an unknown partner. "This neighborhood has too many educated people who ask too many questions. I need to force out at least 3 or 4 more families before we can completely control the homeowner association board. Once we do that, we can raise the monthly fees to $2,000 like we planned." The Thompson family is just the beginning of a much bigger operation. The scope of Derek's scheme was far larger than we had imagined. Sarah's investigation revealed that Derek was running a sophisticated real estate fraud scheme. He would impersonate a police officer to intimidate families into selling their homes at below market prices, then purchase the properties through shell companies and resell them at significant profits. Our neighborhood was just the latest target in a pattern that had been going on for over 5 years across multiple states. "He is not just a wannabe cop," Sarah explained, showing me files that Rodriguez had helped her access. "He is running an organized criminal enterprise." But Derek Morrison was about to learn that he had picked the wrong family to mess with, because when you threaten someone who has been trained to fight the world's most dangerous enemies, you better be prepared for a war you cannot possibly win. Sarah meticulously planned what she called Operation Disclosure. She organized an emergency homeowner association meeting and invited every neighbor in our subdivision, including Derek, under the pretense of resolving the fence dispute through democratic dialogue. The invitation was perfectly worded to appeal to Derek's ego and his need to be seen as the neighborhood authority. Derek arrived wearing his usual pressed navy polo with his fake badge gleaming on his chest, confident that he would once again dominate the gathering. He brought Linda with him, and both of them looked like they were attending a victory celebration rather than a community meeting. "Sarah, I appreciate that you finally recognize the importance of community cooperation," Derek announced with condescending authority. "I hope we can settle this matter like responsible adults." His voice carried the same patronizing tone he had used throughout our conflict. "Before we discuss the fence, I have some questions about neighborhood security," Sarah replied, standing calmly in front of the gathered crowd. She was wearing a professional black blazer, and I noticed she had positioned herself where she could see every exit and had a clear view of all attendees. "Derek, since you are our community's law enforcement representative, could you please show everyone your official police identification number?" The question seemed innocent enough, but I could see Derek's confident expression falter slightly. "That is sensitive information that I cannot share publicly for security reasons," he responded, his voice losing some of its usual authority. "You understand that police officers have to protect their identities." Several neighbors nodded, seeming to accept this explanation. "All police officers have badge numbers that are matters of public record," Sarah continued. "If you are really a police officer, providing your badge number should be routine." The crowd began to murmur, sensing that something significant was happening. Sarah connected her laptop to a large screen she had set up and displayed the official roster of the San Diego County Police Department. "This is the current directory of all active law enforcement officers in our area," she announced to the increasingly curious crowd. "Derek Morrison's name does not appear on this list, nor does it appear in the records for the past 5 years. The murmuring grew louder as neighbors began to realize what they were hearing. Derek's face began turning red, but he tried to maintain his composure. "There is obviously some kind of database error," Derek stammered. "The system does not always update correctly for officers in specialized assignments." He was still trying to bluff his way through, but sweat was beginning to show on his forehead. "Actually," Sarah replied, pulling up another document, "here is the receipt for a fake police badge purchased from an online costume company and shipped to 1247 Oakwood Drive, your address, 8 months ago." The crowd gasped audibly as the evidence appeared on screen. Derek jumped to his feet. "This is ridiculous. Sarah has obviously fabricated these documents to make me look bad. She is the one who has been lying to all of you." His voice was rising, and the desperation was becoming obvious to everyone present. "But the fake badge is just the beginning," Sarah continued calmly. "Derek Morrison is actually Derek Mitchell, and he has 4 prior arrests in Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico for impersonating police officers and threatening civilians." The screen filled with Derek's actual mugshot and criminal record. Several neighbors stood up and began backing away from Derek, finally understanding that they had been living next to a dangerous criminal. He moves from state to state, repeating the same pattern: pose as a police officer, intimidate residents, force them to sell their homes at reduced prices, then purchase the properties through shell companies. Linda tried to speak up. "This is all lies. My husband is a respected police officer." But her voice lacked conviction, and she kept glancing at Derek like she was waiting for instructions on what to say next. Derek suddenly stood up and pulled what appeared to be a service weapon from his belt, pointing it towards Sarah while shouting, "Enough, everyone needs to shut up and listen to me. Sarah Thompson is a threat to national security. She has been trained to kill people." His mask had completely fallen away, revealing the unstable personality underneath. The crowd panicked, with several people screaming and others diving for cover behind chairs. Parents grabbed their children and tried to shield them from what was happening. But Sarah did not move. She stood perfectly still, watching Derek with the calm focus of someone who had faced far more dangerous situations. "Derek, you just committed aggravated assault with a deadly weapon," Sarah said in a voice so steady it was almost frightening, "and you have made the biggest mistake of your life." There was something in her tone that made everyone in the room go completely quiet. In less than 3 seconds, Sarah moved with speed and precision that Derek's civilian reflexes could not possibly match. She disarmed him using techniques that only Special Forces personnel learn, secured the weapon, and had Derek face down on the ground with his hands zip-tied behind his back before most of the crowd realized what had happened. "Derek Mitchell, you are under citizen's arrest for impersonating a police officer, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit fraud," Sarah announced while maintaining perfect control of the situation. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." The crowd's fear transformed into amazement, and then enthusiastic applause. Someone had been live streaming the entire confrontation, and within minutes the video was spreading across social media with thousands of views and comments praising Sarah's actions. Real police officers arrived within minutes, led by Detective Maria Santos from the San Diego Police Department and Sarah's contact Captain Rodriguez from the FBI. "Outstanding work, Senior Chief," Rodriguez said as his team took Derek into custody. "This investigation has been building for months, and you have just provided the evidence we needed to close the case." But Derek had one final revelation that caught everyone off guard. As the officers were leading him to the patrol car, he turned back to Sarah with a bitter smile. "You think this is over? You have no idea how deep this goes. I was not working alone, and you were specifically targeted long before you moved to this neighborhood. There are people who want military families like yours eliminated from certain areas, and they will find another way." Sarah's expression hardened as she realized their victory was not just self-defense. She had unknowingly disrupted a much larger conspiracy designed to systematically remove military personnel from strategic neighborhoods. The investigation that followed would reveal a network spanning 6 states, targeting military families and defense contractors through coordinated harassment campaigns. The FBI's investigation expanded rapidly after Derek's arrest, ultimately leading to the capture of 23 operatives across 6 states who had been systematically targeting military families and defense industry workers. Derek Mitchell faced 7 federal charges, including impersonating a federal officer, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy against the United States. Linda Peterson, his wife and accomplice, was also arrested and faced charges for her role in the intelligence-gathering operation. During interrogation, both Derek and Linda revealed details about a well-funded network that had successfully forced over 40 military families to relocate, causing an estimated $15 million in financial damage. The real police investigation uncovered that Derek had been using sophisticated techniques to identify and target specific types of families. His organization had access to databases that revealed which residents had security clearances, military backgrounds, or connections to defense contractors. Our neighborhood had been selected because it housed 3 families with ties to Naval Special Warfare Command, 2 defense engineers, and a retired Air Force intelligence officer. This was not random harassment, Captain Rodriguez explained during our debriefing. This was a coordinated attack on America's defense infrastructure at the community level. Sarah received a commendation from Naval Special Warfare Command for exceptional service in protecting national security and exposing domestic threats. More importantly, our case led to the creation of new protocols for protecting military families in civilian communities. The case resulted in the passage of what became known as the Derek Mitchell Act, federal legislation that increased penalties for impersonating law enforcement and created easier verification systems for citizens to confirm officer identities. Sarah was invited to serve as an advisor to the Department of Homeland Security's new Community Defense Program. Our neighborhood transformation was remarkable. The next homeowner association meeting took place in a completely different atmosphere, with neighbors united by shared purpose rather than divided by fear and intimidation. People who had been afraid to speak up during Derek's reign of terror finally felt safe to voice their opinions. Thomas Chen, a retired attorney from the end of our street, proposed creating a new 5-member oversight board with rotating leadership and transparent decision-making processes. We need safeguards to prevent anyone from accumulating unchecked power, he explained, and the proposal passed unanimously. Margaret Williams, a 73-year-old retired teacher, stood up and addressed the crowd. I nominate Sarah Thompson for Homeowner Association President. She has proven she can protect this community. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah graciously declined the position while agreeing to serve on the Oversight Committee. Real leadership is not about having power over people, Sarah explained to the crowd. It is about empowering people to protect themselves and their community. Her words became the unofficial motto of our new neighborhood association. 6 months later, Oakwood Heights held its first annual Unity Day celebration, featuring family activities, neighborhood barbecues, and a special presentation about community safety and civic engagement. Children played games on the same streets where Derek had once terrorized their parents. Adults shared stories about building stronger, more connected neighborhoods. The event drew visitors from surrounding communities who wanted to learn about our model for neighborhood security and governance. Local news stations featured our story as an example of how ordinary citizens can stand up to intimidation and create positive change. Sarah's role in our community extended far beyond that single confrontation. She began teaching basic self-defense classes for interested neighbors, organized emergency preparedness workshops, and helped establish a neighborhood watch program based on mutual respect rather than suspicion and control. Parents frequently asked her to speak with their teenagers about leadership, bravery, and standing up for what is right. The most important lesson Sarah would tell them is that real strength comes from protecting others, not from controlling them. The children in our neighborhood particularly looked up to Sarah. They would gather around her during community events, asking questions about the military and begging her to teach them cool moves. Sarah always emphasized that the real skills they needed were awareness, confidence, and the bravery to speak up when something was wrong. Standing in our backyard 6 months after Derek's arrest, I looked at our 6-foot metal fence, the same fence that had started everything, but now it represented something completely different. Not a barrier between neighbors, but a symbol of the right to privacy, safety, and respect in our own home. Children's laughter echoed from the community playground that had been built with funds recovered from Derek's real estate scam, and the street buzzed with the sounds of families who no longer lived in fear. The playground equipment bore a small plaque in honor of those who stand up for justice. "Do you ever feel sorry about it?" I asked Sarah as we watched our neighbors enjoying a peaceful evening. "Revealing your real identity and background." Sarah smiled and pointed to a new sign at the entrance to our neighborhood. "Oakwood Heights, a community protected by truth and unity." "There are times when secrets need to be kept," she replied, "but there are also times when the truth needs to be spoken to protect the people you love." A group of children ran past our fence, laughing and calling out, "Hi, Miss Sarah, are you teaching us more self-defense tomorrow?" "Not self-defense," Sarah called back with a laugh. "Being alert, and yes, we will practice tomorrow after school." The children cheered and continued running toward the playground, their voices filling the evening air with joy and freedom. As the sun set over our peaceful neighborhood, I realized that our story was not just about defeating one bad person. It was about discovering what happens when ordinary people find the bravery to stand up for justice. Derek Morrison had tried to use fear and fake authority to control our community, but he had unknowingly challenged someone who dedicated her life to protecting others. Our 6-foot fence still stands today, no longer a source of conflict, but a reminder that sometimes the best way to protect what matters most is to refuse to back down when you know you are right. And every time I see that fence, I remember that heroes do not always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they are the quiet neighbors who have been secretly keeping the whole world a little bit safer, one community at a